I definitely have. They were actually more diffuse than what emerged in the end, but they were twofold. On one hand, I was committed to making major progress on a book trilogy. 2 volumes were getting close to completion, and the plan was to get them to very near completion. That definitely succeeded. The other plan was to work on research projects on one hand, to continue on existing projects that were at that time nearing completion, as well as the hope to start new ones, especially new ones with local mathematicians. And that worked in interesting ways. The projects that seemed close to completion actually expanded. They are now again close to completion, but as larger and much more interesting projects. And there are new projects that I did start with local mathematicians, as well as a collaboration, for instance, with Yves Coudin, who is not local but in France, and that's a new collaboration for me. So yes, thumbs up, mission accomplished. That's a big question, because in fact, it's hard to say where to begin. For instance, the people who came, I was thinking about the year in review, and I stopped after about 24 names of grand people I could name. But just to summarize a little bit, of the people who came, there were some grand people in the discipline who were here for workshops or otherwise. Yakov Pesin, the founder of Pesin theory, which is a big thing in dynamical systems, was here for a recent workshop and a collaboration. Mark Polycott was here twice, and he is one of the big people in the field. Same with Federico Rodriguez Hertz. And Jörg Schmeling was here both for workshops as well as explicitly as a scientific guest and for collaboration. And that accounts for one of the new projects that I mentioned earlier on. I could go on with stellar people in research, as well as people who are nationally known here in France for organizing people and mentoring the next generation. Working with Françoise Dalbeau, Barbara Shapira, and Louis Frinard was a great privilege as well. And these schools that were organized here are also a way of creating lots of mathematics immediately and for years to come. Specific other milestones were the projects I mentioned before, that there are things that turned out to be bigger than expected, where there's now a lot more known than there was before. And these are, as far as my projects go, on the interface of dynamics and geometry, which is also the name of one of the schools that we had, and implicit in a second one as well. These are works with Patrick Foulon in great part, and then again with Jörg Schmeling, as well as the projects with Serge Trubetskoy that we undertook. Yes, definitely there's progress, and I could describe in a little bit of detail some of the projects I've been engaged in, one of which is to understand, after having defined them, new invariants for foliation. They were called Godby-en-Vez invariants after an initial invariant discovered in Strasbourg in the 1970s. And Patrick Foulon and I have been working on a project to define a whole family of these that lends itself to a new approach to some geometric rigidity theory that identifies algebraic systems in a novel way as being set apart from the great vastness of hyperbolic systems otherwise. This is one example of something in the interface of dynamics and geometry. Another very different project is the one with Coudin and Trubetskoy, where we realized, building largely on work by Coudin and earlier by Barbillot, that the original argument used to prove ergodicity in broad classes of hyperbolic dynamical systems, that's due to Hopf, goes much further than envisioned by Hopf in terms of the conclusions. The original application and all the applications until quite recently were to prove ergodicity, which is important for the probabilistic treatment of dynamical systems. What Kuden found out, and on which we elaborated in this joint project, is that one can go much further. Instead of just having the law of large numbers, which is ergodicity with the Birkhoff-Ergodic theorem, one actually has mixing and multiple mixing, which are much more chaotic ways of behaving, much stronger ways in which one can say that there is decorrelations and randomness in a probabilistic way. That's been an exciting project, and this is one of the ones that is just about at its conclusion, at least for now. The work never stops. It's been a pleasure to be immersed in the community here, and even though I've had visits here previously, this was very different in quality because my previous visits were short and they were oriented towards specific projects, largely with Patrick Foulon. The time now was different in that it allowed me to immerse in the local community. So I was committed to investigating whether with Serge Trubetskoy, who is the other holder of this project, we could in fact work on specific projects, and that happily has succeeded with two of them. The one with Kuden I've already mentioned, and one with Schmeling that is just now emerging and looks very interesting. I've been impressed as I arrived here very quickly with the energy that I found in the area in Marseille, in particular in the seminars at Fruitmam. The seminars that take place at EML are quite impressive in their range and what's going on. But at Fruitmam I found even more to be astonished by, because that is where both halves of the local mathematics department meet, and where Le Teich, which is the seminar I most attended on Friday mornings in the shared space near the train station, gathers people from a much larger range of research areas than usual seminars would. And so there's good attendance as well as a broad program. And I found that rather eye-opening about the community, as well as in terms of learning about mathematics and getting engaged in the community. So it's been very good, and it has been something in which I felt my collaboration, in particular with Serge Trubetskoy, was embedded. My interactions with Sandro Vajenti, who's also here. But for instance, I have brought a doctoral student, Sarah Bray, and she's in fact interacted much more broadly with the community on the other campus, in particular the interactions with Pascal Hubert, who organizes this seminar and who has been teaching a course, have made a huge difference for her. So in terms of thinking of her as a member of my research group at Tufts, the interactions really have been very substantial with numerous colleagues in this area. Yes, there's been great progress. I was really looking forward to spending at least one of my 2 semesters of leave from Tufts on these 2 books. And the reason for wanting to do so is that on the to-do list for these 2 volumes that are getting ready, there were large chunks of work that were not conceivable for work that takes 5 minutes at a time or half of a weekend day at a time with interruptions. So for these 2 projects, the time before I actually arrived here while I was still at Tufts, as well as the initial months here, were tremendously helpful. So right now it's fair to say that the big blocks that stood in the way of completion and submission of these 2 volumes have been removed. That doesn't mean that all the work is done, but it means that the work has now been reduced to the kinds of things that can be accomplished on the side while the dream here is over and it's back to real life. So yes, these objectives have in fact been accomplished. It's been a great time here, and certainly I will come back because, after all, CIRM offers the opportunities of research in pairs, and I have done that before, and I will certainly do so again. The reason is in part that there are projects with locals that need a few more meetings of this sort, as well as the fact that using CIRM for these kinds of projects, even when no locals involved, is very attractive. What's made my stay here for these 6 months such a dream is that there are local mathematicians with whom to collaborate, but for instance, as well, for writing 2 book volumes, the possibility of hiding during the week and on weekends in a house, in a park that's out in nature, was a very precious thing. And so for a life of someone who was looking for a few months to lose himself in research and writing projects, this has been an ideal place because on one hand, I could leave the house and walk towards the Mediterranean, be there within 20 minutes, or decide after 10 minutes that the idea I needed had emerged and I could turn around. So there's plenty of nature, solitude, a very pleasant environment for taking breaks from the work as well as having the opportunity for creative ideas emerge just by getting away from the desk, going outside without being sidetracked by too much going on. On the other hand, it's not an isolating environment unless one wants it to be. So I could also take a 5-minute walk to the bus and then half an hour later be in the second greatest city of France, which meant lots of opportunities for playing around in town, as well as enjoying the interplay between the town and its great location. For instance, one way of getting into town is to take the bus first and then the subway. Another one is to take the bus and then another bus along the Corniche to enjoy a beautiful ride and the like. So unlike just about any other place I know, this has provided me with an environment where, depending on my mood at the time or the project on which I'm working or other needs or preferences, I could choose to be someone living on the outskirts of the city or somebody living in a national park. In that respect, it's been the best of both. It's also a place that, thanks to the airport and the train station, is well connected to the rest of Europe. And so, in fact, much more so than planned. I've taken short trips to various places within France, all the way out to Brest, which is about as far in France as you can be from Marseille, to the UK, to Germany, and soon to Austria as well, in order to present in seminar talks and in some of these cases to start collaborations as well. So in that way, it has opened my eyes further to the European mathematical community, in particular the one in France, but also provided the opportunity to connect my work as well as the work of SIUM to that taking place elsewhere. The location, of course, is also attractive simply because it's easy to convince people to come here, on one hand as scientific visitors, because it's an attractive environment with the built-in support for the stay. So the organization is easy and attracting people is easy, as well as for conferences. I've organized 3 big events here, and the biggest was attended by just under 100 people. And there are not that many people who, in this format, not many places that can organize and host events of this size at all. And SIUM is the largest one in terms of the number of mathematicians who come through altogether. And so we've talked about the kinds of mathematical progress that there has been by focusing on the projects in which I've been involved, either my book writing or the collaborations or what else I've seen happening in the region. But I think it's almost surely true that the best value for one's money one gets in the way SIUM does, which is by getting people together in meetings and making sure that these meetings aren't packed with talks, but rather with conversations. And that's what I've seen happening. After 2 of the schools, in fact, my workshop as well, I asked the participants to email me back with some comments on what had happened. And the number of comments I got back was gratifying in the first place, but also just by collating these comments, one sees that 1 week here of putting people together and giving them the time and the right other collection of people with whom to interact has produced an enormous amount of mathematics. Often it was in finishing projects, other times it was giving essential help in making unexpected progress on a project. Other times it spawned entirely new ideas for projects, and this is for young as well as older people, such as myself, that coming together here has made a remarkable impact And between the three events in question, we've had about 200 people. And if I multiply measurable progress times 200, that's a lot. This is a big question. It's in fact one that I will be thinking about for a long time to come, because it's not very easy to summarize similarities and differences. One thing I can think of is that in France, as well as in the US, there is a sense that mathematics is organized at a level that goes beyond an individual chair, even an individual department. So mathematics is viewed as an enterprise that has a collective aspect to it. Even though a mathematician can well be productive on his or her own, there is really an added strength by working as a community. Both countries have a strong education system, and that certainly helps because it provides a base for supporting a good amount of mathematics. There are pronounced differences, though. In France, there is central support for research at a level or of a kind the US can only dream of. The fact that the CNRS provides each department, in effect, with a shadow copy of the department consisting only of researchers is absolutely astonishing, and that adds immense heft to the mathematics research enterprise. Another really remarkable thing about France is that it is relatively easy to get permanent positions at an early age, and that enables strong young mathematicians in France to really focus on the trajectory of their research career in terms of scientific content very early on, rather than in terms of finding the next postdoc or finding permanent employment. And often by doing so within a larger mathematics department. The strength of the US is its heterogeneity, which makes it also a system that's hard to understand. But it means that there's a very large job market, and a job market that caters really to all kinds of tastes in terms of what a mathematician likes to do individually for a career, finding the right balance between research and teaching, and likewise for universities to seek candidates with different qualities, either a strength in research only, or strength in research and teaching, or possibly teaching only. And the largeness of this market, as well as the openness of this market on the one hand, and the market of private enterprise outside universities, means that there are strong incentives for mathematicians, students, and the like, to pursue careers in mathematics, be they in private enterprise or universities, instead of having to look for something altogether different. Unfortunately, a similarity between France and the US right now is that there is also an erosion of support for research in the larger sense and for mathematics in very different ways. In the US, there has been a long-term trend for the public to withdraw from funding for higher education. And the state universities that used to be entirely funded from state budgets are now, for the most part, funded at 10% or less level from the state, and have to raise the rest of their funds in other ways, often by high tuition payments. And this is a change from the ideas of the founding fathers, who believed that public education and an educated public is really a worthwhile goal for itself because it will make society function better. The attitude now is that education is an investment for an individual in a future career. This is a major change, and the societal effects are already being seen and will be probably more pronounced in the long term. But the effect on mathematics is that there are fewer faculty positions where research is viewed as a component of the position, meaning professorial positions, and many more contingent positions for lecturers whose only criterion for employment and retention is the teaching only. In France, the change is that there are recent budget cuts that have made a distressingly rapid cut in how many positions are available as maître de conf and the like. And while in the US, I see perturbing long-term trend, in France, my impression is that there's a relatively short-term trend in just a few years to have a collapse on the number of starting positions by almost an order of magnitude. Even for an outsider, that's a frightening prospect, because I've admired the strength of the mathematical enterprise in France for decades. But I have no idea whether a decade from now even, much less 2 decades from now, it will be anything like it is now.